Fallout over those photos and video of Justin Trudeau in blackface and brownface grows. Canadians still digesting the shock of seeing some of those images from 2 nights ago. Voters need to decide now whether they're willing to accept the Liberal leader's apology before heading to the polls on October the 21st, or does it change fundamentally the way people view Trudeau? Remember, of course, he is the Liberal warrior, the progressive, the self-declared feminist. He attends pride parties and parades, and he's long talked about the idea of an inclusive and multicultural Canada. I want to bring in our guests here who we've brought on the show. In studio with me, Balpreet Singh, the legal counsel for the World Sikh Organization of Canada. Also in studio with me is Rodley Deverlis, co-founder of Black Lives Matter Toronto. We also have Hadia Rodrigue joining us. She is a lawyer and an inclusion advocate in downtown Toronto, and our studio's there. And in Winnipeg, very happy to have Zara Kadem. She is the president of the Arab Students Association at the University of Manitoba. Balpreet, let me start with you here. Your reaction to seeing the photos. You've had a couple of days to sort of process it. What do you think?
I think it was initially such a shock because it was against the brand. This guy understands. I mean, he's got the most diverse cabinet ever. He's got a celebration of multiculturalism whenever he could. And if this guy doesn't get it, then, who does? I think the apology has made a difference. The first day's apology wasn't as good as the second day's. I mean, not calling it blackface wasn't enough. When he called it blackface, I thought that was a step forward. But, there are some things that I still don't understand. I mean, calling Jagmeet Singh, it's a nice gesture, but I don't think Jagmeet Singh's the representative of all people of color. I mean, calling him, I don't understand. Is he going to be the one that's going to symbolically forgive him? And secondly, Trudeau is saying that he stands against all types of intolerance. You don't have to go too far to find intolerance in Canada. I mean, Bill 21 is forcing people out of their homes and their jobs. And none of the national leaders are coming down hard on what I think is a national crisis, where people of certain ethnic minorities and faiths are being forced from their homes and their provinces because of a discriminatory law. So I think there's a lot to talk about. And if it's just about the picture, that's not a full conversation. It has to be about racism and intolerance in Canada.
Well, that's a really good point, because we're focusing a lot, Rodney, on is he a racist, is he not? What does he mean by this? And there's a lot bigger conversation to be had here. What's your read? Are you buying what Justin Trudeau is saying, his apology, or not at all?
I'm not buying it. I think that anybody who's followed Justin Trudeau and his record says it all. And I think that, similarly to you, I think there's a sense of backpedaling here. I think the actual apology and the actual image itself, the images themselves are gruesome, they're horrific, but really words and actions to me speak louder than words, and his record on a number of issues relating to race have been shoddy. Realistically, this was the Prime Minister that tweeted, "Welcome refugees," but have denied 90% of Haitian asylum seekers. His record on cannabis and not really including provisions that would support people of color and criminal justice reform hasn't been done. Generally across the board, we've known this Prime Minister has been great with words. He's coiffed. He's great in terms of projecting a particular sort of image about himself. But people in community, activists, community groups across this country since the beginning of his tenure have said, nah, he's not who he says he is. So I think this is a great and an important moment for us as Canadians to ask ourselves, what sort of values do we see important in our leaders? What sort of attributes do we actually want? Do we want the Prime Minister that's going to cry about reconciliation but does nothing? Or do we want a Prime Minister that's actually going to go beyond the words and actually have his actions match that? Having said that, I also think that there's something to be said about why. I'm curious as to why this hasn't come up for Justin Trudeau. I mean, if I was running, if I was the current Prime Minister and I had a particular thing of my past that was troubling, I would think that he would try to come ahead of the narrative. I don't know why someone in his team didn't. I don't know why the opportunity was missed. Maybe he thought this wasn't going to come out, or was this insignificant, or were there other instances of this that there's no memory of these images because this was the norm?
Let me, if I can, bring in Hadia as well. Hadia, what do you make of this? You've been following it. I know you've been commenting as well in the media. Your read on what we're talking about?
Well, first of all, I'm not shocked. Racism exists in Canada, and I'm not shocked that a privileged white male did something like this in his past. I think the question is, has Justin Trudeau changed and shown growth, and do his policies actually support anti-Black racism and support people of color in this country? And so I think that's one of the questions to be asked. I think the focus on is Trudeau a racist or not is the wrong question. The question is, what are the conditions in Canada that allowed him to do something like that and continue to allow people to dress up in blackface to this day? You know, we need to look at the structural racism that underpins these kinds of actions, not just try and cast a black and white decision on whether or not he's racist or not. We try to spend too much time on the individual instead of addressing what is truly at issue, is the systemic racism that we have in this country.
Let's go to Winnipeg and bring Zara into the conversation. Zara, what's your take?
Well, I mean, at first, I just thought that this was extremely hurtful. I mean, as a person of color that recently immigrated, or not recently, I guess, anymore, but has immigrated to Canada, I mean, just as that, I mean, I look different from anybody else. And I think me, myself, and a lot of other people in my situation face like an identity crisis almost, because we look around and we do look different from other people. So I think to have that alone is tough enough, and then to hear somebody in such a respected and powerful position kind of mock our color, like it's truly hurtful.
There was something interesting that Jagmeet Singh had to say today, and he said, you know, why is it that people of color, people from different communities are the ones who have to explain why they are hurt and why they are the ones who have an issue when something happens? I just want to play that for the four of you to listen to and get your reaction to it.
Why is it that people that, you know, racialized people, black, indigenous, people of color have to justify why this was wrong? And in that moment, we kind of had a bit of a laugh. It's like, it's pretty absurd that obviously this has a negative impact, but why is it that people impacted have to explain why it hurts? It should be obvious.
Well, that's an interesting point, Balbri, the notion of, you know, and it's sort of a rethink, right? When you hear that, it's like, yeah, of course, that makes sense. Why is the onus on us when this is happening, somebody else's actions are doing this to us?
Definitely. I think Jagmeet Singh in this whole situation has been a breath of fresh air, in that when we're talking about these issues, often people of color are missing from the conversation. Even some of the panels that we've had talking about this have been all white. But sometimes it's shocking to us as people of color that, you know, do we really have to explain ourselves here? I think even the issue of racism, it's a conversation that we're not willing to have in Canada. We talk about, you know, the past racism, for the past couple of days, I've talked about how I was bullied as a youngster in rural Ontario. But the fact is, we did a survey in 2011 in Peel region, where you have a lot of Sikhs, and 40% of Sikh kids in Peel school board schools said that they were being bullied because of their religion. In 2016, we repeated it again. It's about 300 to 400 students. And that number dropped because we were working with the school board to 27%. But more than 1 in 4 kids is saying that they're facing bullying because of their identity. And this is today. So racism is a reality. But I mean, all of us, I think, are hoping that this is just an opportunity to talk about it for once. And even the way Jagmeet Singh's been treated on the campaign trail. I mean, people saying, take that hat off and look normal and we'll think about voting for you. That's absolutely ridiculous. It's unthinkable that we're giving people a national media platform to repeat these comments. So there's a lot to talk about, and I hope we actually get the opportunity this time.
Hadiya, I saw you reacting as well when we were playing that from Jagmeet Singh. What were you thinking?
I would love to see Justin Trudeau explain to the Canadian public why what he did was wrong. Because I don't think a lot of people understand why blackface is wrong. And he has the power and the privilege and the obligation to explain why his actions were wrong. And I think that the fact that no one has really asked him that reflects the lack of diversity we have in the media, because if I were there, I would have asked him right away, you know, why was this wrong? It's not enough to say this was racist and I did a bad thing. You need to explain. You have to use your privilege and your position and your power to take this moment and treat it as a learning moment for Canada.
Zara, what do you make of it?
I think the worst part of this all is that a lot of the photos that were taken were from when he was a teacher at a school. And as a teacher, you're being a role model for your students, right? And for him to act in such a way almost makes this okay. And I think a lot of Canadians, too, even listening to the town hall last night in Saskatoon, I think a lot of Canadians don't really see what was wrong with this, or don't even think that it's that big of a deal. Because, I mean, if we look back to the history of blackface in the 19th century, this was a way for white people that are privileged to use paint their faces black for a day and mock these stereotypes of colored people. And I think that needs to be acknowledged, that Canada does not accept this type of behavior in any way whatsoever.
Rodney?
I think it comes down to policy, 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 policy. You know, my parents have always said that words don't mean anything unless the actions follow them. And for me, I think this is an opportunity for him to, yes, articulate why he knows and he recognizes that this is wrong, but what is his plan to address race relations in this country? What is his plan on immigration? What is his plan on criminalization? What is his plan on carding and policing? What is his plan on affordable housing for racialized communities?
It's all related.
It's all related.
Right.
So, I would hope if you've had a growing and learning moment and you are in positions, the highest position of power, of electoral power in this country, that you would translate that to initiatives, to policies, to concrete race agenda, right? What is your Black agenda? What is your agenda for religious minorities in this country? What is your plan to address and to facilitate a conversation and a learning collectively like you individually have? I don't see that, and in fact, I think that's lacking in a lot of our leaders.
Hadia, there's something else too. Justin Trudeau talked about his privilege, and there is, of course, this narrative out there that he was raised in a very fortunate family, that he was perhaps growing up in a bubble, that he was not exposed to what many other Canadians are exposed to. And so there seemed to be this kind of idea that, well, now I understand and let's all move past this, and I apologize. Were you, when you were listening to it, were you at all concerned about the sincerity or the sort of genuineness of the apology, that he really sort of understood?
He was a prime minister's son. He's grown up in the spotlight. He saw his father pass a lot of policies that had to do with multiculturalism. Of course he knew better. He can't say he didn't know better. And that's not an excuse, but he needs to explain why, even though he knew better, he still did something. But again, I agree that it's really about the policies. He can make all the apologies he wants, but what is he doing to address the real problems that are faced by people of color in this country?
I've only got about a minute left, so I just want to go quickly, Balpreet, your reaction to that, how Trudeau has tried to frame this, and we're talking about policy, like, you know, you can talk the talk, but you need to do something about it.
I sincerely hope that this isn't just politics. And if they're sincere and genuine about wanting to counter intolerance, Bill 21 in Quebec is a prime example. You are seeing people forced from their jobs. Our vice president, my organization's vice president, was a teacher in Montreal. That's where she's lived for the most of her life, having to move to British Columbia because she wears a turban to find a job there. These are internal refugees, and none of the party leaders have come down strongly. They've said, you know, we're going to leave it to Quebecers to figure this out. Well, does that mean you're going to leave it to those people that have been discriminated against to fight for themselves? I mean, what's the strategy? 48% of Canadians in a recent poll said that they would support something similar in their own province. If this spreads outside of Quebec, the Canada we know today and the freedoms we enjoy today will forever be changed, and the Canada that we loved will become totally something else. This is a national crisis, and I'd like to see all of the party leaders actually weigh down on this.
Zara, I saw you nodding as well when Balpreet was talking. Your read on sort of Bill 21, but also the larger issue here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that, I mean, we should be judging Justin Trudeau as an individual and not his party, because whatever his party believes in might be different, and the policies and platforms that they bring up will really determine what the Liberal Party really stands for. But I think exactly what the other person was saying, Bill 23, nobody's really doing anything about it, and this is affecting, like, Canadians ourselves. And I think Canada's strength is diversity, and that's something we should be encouraging and not furthermore discouraging people from even living in different parts of Canada.
Rodney, last word to you. What do you think?
I think that this election just got really exciting.
Absolutely.
And I think that unbeknownst to these three leaders, I think that they're actually, they're creating a sort of a conversation that we need to have. And I think that I hope that beyond this election that this conversation continues. And I hope that Canadians, from wherever they're seeing this information, whether they're for his forgiveness or not, whichever side of the aisle that you're on, recognize that we're not there yet. And if your boy Justin Trudeau, the ones that everybody loves and is a cherished Canadian icon, can be susceptible to racism and can have that sort of weak spot, that blind spot, that this is actually deeply embedded in our communities and our society as a whole. And I think that it's Justin Trudeau has a lot to answer for, and he's going to have to answer this even beyond the elections.
It's been wonderful to have the four of you with us, and thank you for taking the time to come on CTV News.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Balpreet, Rodney, and Hadia and Zara joining us from Toronto and Winnipeg, and of course here in studio with me as well.